They told you dreams are echoes of your day, that the images flickering behind your eyelids are just memory residue, sorted quietly by a tired brain. But what if that flickering is not your memory at all? And what if the dream is not yours? You wake in the middle of the night, breath shallow, the room quiet except for the sound of your own pulse, and you're certain you heard a voice clear, deliberate, speaking in a tone that didn't belong to anyone you've ever known. It wasn't your inner monologue. It wasn't your subconscious replaying a memory. It was a foreign voice, but it didn't startle you, because in the moment it felt normal, and only after waking do you question it. This is not unusual. In a 1996 study published in Sleep Research, subjects under observation reported hearing complex voices and foreign languages in the transitional state between REM sleep and wakefulness. But none of them spoke those languages in waking life. Brain scans showed activity in language centers lighting up in patterns inconsistent with internal recall. Something was being received, not merely processed. You may want to tell yourself it's just hypnagogia, the threshold phase between waking and dreaming, where the brain is disorganized, grasping at fragments. But how do you explain information in those fragments that the dreamer has no access to while awake? Equations, symbols, even nonverbal emotions that are not yours delivered, like messages across an invisible barrier. Why do these signals arrive precisely when consciousness has thinned enough to be penetrable? Consider the Sethian dream paradox, proposed quietly in obscure philosophical circles. If two dreamers have identical dreams on the same night, with the same details, and neither knew of the other's life, who authored the dream? This isn't science fiction. In 2005, two patients under unrelated sleep studies in Montreal and Warsaw reported identical dream narratives, not symbolically similar identical. A hallway of black doors, the number 237 repeating on the walls. A large figure of indeterminate species communicating silently with them. The same colors, the same transitions. Neither had ever met. Neither was shown any pre-sleep stimulus in common. The studies were buried. The scientists abandoned replication attempts, not because it was unscientific, but because it was uncomfortable. Your brain is the most complex signal receiver we know, and sleep is its most porous state. It isn't just sorting memory, it's listening. And in those fragile REM windows, consciousness is thin enough to bleed. Think of your skull as a closed container. What if sleep opens it for transmission? You want comfort. You want to believe. Dreams are yours private theater. But the brain doesn't produce thought the way we assume. Antonio Damasio demonstrated that cognition is a loop of emotional, physiological, and narrative impulses. Your sense of identity is a recursive trick. Your dream voice that isn't you. That's the illusion peeling back for a moment, revealing the silence you never invited, that waits every night for your surrender. When children report the blue man or the spider mouth, it's dismissed as nightmare nonsense. But trace the global ethnography of sleep visitations, and you'll find eerie coherence. Cultures on opposite sides of history who never met describe almost identical beings emerging in sleep, luminous, faceless, emotionally invasive, bearing no message except a feeling too large to explain. How do we collectively imagine the same thing without a shared source? Sleep paralysis researchers want to reduce it to brain misfiring. But during paralysis, subjects often feel observed as if sleep is a spotlight and something is watching from the other side. Harvard's 2013 study showed spikes in fear-related neural networks not corresponding to imagined threats, but reacting as though to real presence. The deeper you go, the more that voice in your dream doesn't feel metaphorical. You've had that dream, the one where you hear a message, a warning, a truth so massive that waking instantly rips it away from you. You wake with your hands clenched, mouth dry, knowing you almost understood something enormous, something forbidden, but now it's gone. Where did that message go? Why can't you remember the words, but still feel the emotion of it like mourning a death you never witnessed? Perhaps the message was not meant for your waking mind. Perhaps your consciousness is a closed loop that must be bypassed entirely so. The signal enters only in sleep, only when your ego has gone quiet enough not to interfere. That voice doesn't come from you. It comes through you. And if you listen closely tonight, you might hear it again under the hum of the air conditioner, just beyond the rustling of sheets. But what if the voice isn't speaking this time? What if it's waiting for you to answer? You've always believed your dreams are yours, personal, private, nestled within the folds of your mind, like stories written in invisible ink. But think about it. Why do strangers, separated by continents, culture, and history, report dreams that mirror each other down to the architecture, the sequence, even the emotional temperature? A hallway with no end, a staircase that collapses into itself, a door that shouldn't be opened because something is behind it, and that something knows you. This repetition is not artistic coincidence, it's statistical violation. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious's shared psychic reservoir from which symbols, myths, and images arise. He theorized it was ancestral, evolutionary, spiritual. But even Jung's framework never accounted for synchronicity in content so detailed, so precise, so unsettlingly uniform. Take the liminal hotel phenomenon. Thousands of unrelated people report dreaming of an impossibly large hotel, faded carpets, flickering yellow lights, endless beige corridors. The elevators never work. The rooms are numbered, but out of order. And there's always a sense that something else is staying there too, just out of sight. Reddit forums, dream journals, sleep study, transcriptions, they all converge on this blueprint. Even those who've never heard of the phenomenon report its elements organically. If these dreams are mere psychological constructions, why do we build the same buildings? In 2012, a neural mapping project at MIT identified specific patterns of cortical activity during REM sleep that resemble compressed geographic organization brainwaves, forming topographic shapes, more like city grids than narrative memory. The architecture of your dream may not be metaphor at all. It may be spatial, structural, shared. But who built the map? Ask anthropologists about dream migration, and you'll uncover an eerie timeline. Cultures that began contact with Western media saw a dramatic shift in dream symbols. Suddenly, their deities looked like astronauts, their spirit guides like machines. Yet some symbols remain unchanged. The eye watching you from above. The feeling of falling backward into darkness. The soundless message received just before waking. The oldest civilizations recorded these experiences in cuneiform tablets and cave paintings, spirals, ascending figures, open doors. They weren't drawing art, they were documenting intrusion. Modern neurology avoids these questions, because if the brain is a receiver, as researchers like Carl Pribram and physicist David Bohm have suggested, then the source may not be local. Bohm believed reality itself is a hologram, and consciousness is the decoding algorithm. If that's true, dreams are not fabrications, but downloads, interpreted, images filtered through fragile cognitive structure. Imagine for a moment, your dreamscape isn't imagined, it's accessed. A shared simulation running in parallel to waking reality, shaped by unknown code, shared by every sleeping mind, yet remembered only as fragments. You want to dismiss it. You want to say it's your brain recycling stimuli. But why do so many dream of the same underground cities, the same broken mirrors, the same unbearable sense of being known by something that has no face, no voice, but complete familiarity? What if the dream is a test pattern, an interface, or worse, a form of surveillance? In one experiment at a Tokyo sleep lab, researchers exposed subjects to looping audio containing white noise embedded with ultra-low frequency tones. Nearly 60% of participants reported dreaming of being watched, trapped in geometric structures, or approached by entities with no definable shape but overwhelming presence. The rest, they didn't remember anything. But EEG data showed uniform spike patterns at exactly the same minute of REM phase across all participants. They weren't just dreaming. They were being synchronized. The sleep architecture we navigate every night may not be metaphor. It may be software. And just as some dreams feel like static, others feel like signal direct, urgent, and alien. You've felt it. A dream so clear. It couldn't have come from your subconscious clutter. A place you've never been, but instantly recognize. A question asked in a voice that is not language, but feeling. A city that vanishes the moment you try to remember it. An impossible object you almost understood. And behind it all, the sensation of presence. Not watching you, but waiting for you to notice that you are also watching it. In all those shared dreams, there is one constant, a decision point, the hallway that splits, the button you should never press, the thing you must not look at. Do we all dream the same decision? And why does it feel like someone or something is waiting to see what you choose? Close your eyes, and you can remember a place that never existed. You know the smell of the hallway, the color of the walls, the sound your footsteps made on tile floors that you've never actually walked. There's a window facing a sky you've never seen. The door handle is cold, just like you recall. But this memory, it doesn't belong to any moment of your life. And yet it's as vivid as the real ones. Sometimes even more. In 2007, neuroscientists at the University of Geneva discovered that the hippocampus becomes hyperactive during REM sleep, but the information it processes doesn't align with stored memory. Instead, the brain appears to construct memory for things that never happened and stores them with equal neurological weight as lived experiences. In other words, your brain treats dreams as reality. It doesn't know the difference. But something even more unsettling emerged in follow-up scans. In a small percentage of subjects, there was sustained activity in the parahippocampal place, area PPA, not storylines, locations. People were dreaming of actual places, not imagined scenes. Where are these places? Why do they feel so familiar when no GPS, no map, no waking memory can locate them? Psychologists call them non-referential memories, places you believe you've been but cannot place in time or space. They are common in trauma survivors, near-death experiencers, and most notably in children between the ages of 4 and 7. Before the ego has fully formed, ask a child to draw their dreams. Some draw their homes, some draw monsters, but many draw maps, complete with corridors, intersections, central plazas, like cities drawn from memory by travelers who visited them decades apart. If dreams were only metaphor, you wouldn't be able to draw a floor plan. And yet, these dream places often follow logic inconsistent with physics. Rooms that spiral inward, doors that open into voids, buildings with no entrances but fully furnished interiors. The dream defies matter, and yet the layout remains stable, repeatable. You may have returned to the same dreamscape dozens of times. It may evolve, expand, but it's always the same place. it doesn't behave like imagination. It behaves like geography. Consider the recurring environment phenomenon, reappearing night after night across years. Not scenarios, not characters, places, a cracked pedestrian bridge, a neon-lit food court, a spiral staircase in a collapsing library, unchanging in structure, changing only in emotional resonance. Do you understand what that means? Somewhere in your mind, there is a world you return to in Sleeper World that has terrain, architecture, and even memory that you do not consciously own. You don't invent this place, you revisit it. You've probably said it aloud before. I've had this dream before. The people might blur, but the place remains. Where is it located? Why do you recognize the streets of a city that has no name? What do we call a world that is real, but only accessible when your conscious mind shuts down? Philosopher Thomas Metzinger described the phenomenal self-model, the internal narrative of you that exists only because the brain creates a continuous illusion of identity. That illusion breaks in dreams. Your sense of I becomes unstable. Sometimes you are yourself, sometimes not. Sometimes you're nothing at all, just floating perspective. And yet the place remains. Do you see the contradiction? When your identity dissolves, the space stays stable. You lose yourself, but not your surroundings. This is the reverse of waking life. In waking, you are constant, and the world is chaotic. In dreaming, the world is constant, and you dissolve. Which one, then, is real? Ask the Aboriginal Australians, whose dreamtime cosmology sees dream space not as fantasy, but as the true world, with waking life being merely its surface echo. For them, the dream realm is the foundation upon which all of reality rests. Not imagined, not subjective, more real than waking. Hallway again, the curve in the road, the staircase with 13 steps. You've drawn it, you've walked it, and it's there tonight, waiting behind your eyes, just as it always was. And if that place exists, who else is there, right now, walking its streets? There is a moment in your dreams when something intrudes. It doesn't knock, it doesn't introduce itself. It simply arrives, without form, without voice, yet unmistakably other. You feel it, not with your senses, but with a sudden shift in the texture of thought, like a static charge in your chest, or the whisper of an idea that wasn't yours. And that is the key detail. It wasn't yours. In 1983, the Stanford Sleep and Neuroimaging Lab conducted a now-suppressed experiment on lucid dreamers, individuals trained to maintain awareness inside their dreams. The goal was simple: establish communication with the waking world using eye movement codes. But what they discovered instead was something far less manageable. One subject, after achieving lucidity, ceased responding to signals. For 47 minutes, they remained in REM, completely motionless, with IG readings spiking in abnormal bursts. When they finally awoke, they were inconsolable. They repeated one phrase again and again: "It wasn't my thought. It was thinking inside me." Your senses lie, even when your memories betray you. You return to your inner monologue, the voice that reasons, questions, narrates. But what happens when that voice is not alone? Cognitive science has already accepted that the self is not singular. The brain is a chorus of conflicting micro-identities competing for attention. Your sense of I is just the winner of that internal contest at any given moment. But during sleep, when the executive functions of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, are offline, the gate is left open, and something walks through. There's a term whispered in the corners of cognitive philosophy: xenoconsciousness. It refers to a pattern of thought that arises within a person, but carries markers of external origin. No linguistic structure, no personal relevance, no familiar logic. Just the sudden presence of a conceptual object that feels implanted, as if someone or something left it behind like a fingerprint. Subjects experiencing this often describe the moment with chilling clarity. A foreign awareness presses against them, not as an image, not as a voice, but as a thought that arrived fully formed, without the sensation of having been constructed. It simply appears, whole, complete. Where do those thoughts come from? Neuroscientists dismiss it as confabulation, as the brain filling gaps with noise. But confabulation usually mimics familiar themes, personal history, emotional resonance, cultural memory. Xenothoughts do not. Haven't you? A dream where the idea was the center, not the plot. No characters, no setting, just a concept so enormous you woke up gasping, able to name it, but changed by it. A knowing you couldn't translate, only feel. And now it lingers, without context. This phenomenon is global, cross-cultural, timeless. Shamans describe it as a visitation. Modern psychologists call it anomalous cognition. But the effect is always the same. Something thinks inside you and leaves a scar of knowing that logic cannot bandage. Now look deeper. What if these thoughts, these intrusions, are not random? What if they are targeted? Think of your dreams as a receptor field, a net stretched across dimensions you cannot name, and what leaks through may not be accidental. We know that the human brain emits measurable electromagnetic frequencies. We also know it receives them, as seen in studies of transcranial magnetic stimulation where external fields induce specific thoughts or images. If we can induce thoughts with machines, why assume no external mechanism exists to do the same? Across the boundary of sleep, you are not insulated, you are permeable. Sleep is the period of least resistance. Waking identity is fragile scaffolding, and dreaming strips it away. The ego sleeps, the net opens, and if something with intent, non-human, post-human, or extra-human is reaching across, it would not knock, it would implant. Consider the 1977 Voynich Protocol classified psychological test leaked in fragments. Subjects were shown dreamlike images and instructed to sleep in isolation chambers. Upon waking, they were asked to draw any symbols they remembered. Across dozens of subjects, a strange convergence appeared. Identical glyphs, meaningless in waking language, yet consistent in form. Some of those glyphs matched markings on prehistoric stones found in burial sites with no written language. This isn't science fiction. It's data, it's pattern, it's evidence of transmission. And yet, no institution dares to call it what it is. Intelligence, not native to our cognitive model. Interacting through the only channel we cannot regulate. Dreams. You assume your dreams are passive, that you are the observer, that nothing can reach you there. But what if you are not observing? What if you are the subject of observation? Not errors in processing, but probes, attempts at contact, not through language, but through structure, through the implantation of thought forms designed to test compatibility. If you were building a bridge between worlds, would you use radio, or would you whisper into dreams? And if you are the recipient of this whisper, what does that make you? You've always assumed your thoughts were yours, that the voice in your mind, the one shaping your decisions, filtering your memories, narrating your inner world, originates from within. But look closer, strip the illusion down. What have you ever truly created in the silence of your own skull that wasn't first seeded by something else? The language you speak was handed to you. The categories of right and wrong were scripted long before you were born. Even your dreams are populated with furniture from a house you never built. You are not thinking, you are repeating. A mirror trained to believe it is a sun in 1949. Donald Hebb proposed a now fundamental idea in neuroscience: neurons that fire together, wire together. This became the foundation of neural learning models. It also quietly crushed the romantic notion of originality. Your mind is not a source, is a pattern machine. It strings existing inputs into novel configurations, but it does not invent the raw material. Every idea you've ever had is an echo of echoes, and yet, sometimes, a thought arrives that does not belong to the web. It cuts across your neural pattern. It violates your narrative. It makes no sense, and yet it insists. That's not inspiration. That's invasion. The philosopher Daniel Dennett called it the mimetic parasite, an idea that enters the mind like a virus, reshaping behavior, belief, and identity from within. But what if some memes are not cultural? What if they're non-human signals, misinterpreted as personal insight? You had a dream once. Maybe you still remember it. It didn't make sense. There was no plot, no characters, just a geometric object, hovering in a space too large to be real. You woke up shaken. That image stayed with you for years, but you never saw it in a book, never learned about it in school, never encountered it in media. It simply arrived. That wasn't you. That was something using you as a surface. Think about the dream that woke you not with fear, but with revelation. The kind of dream that leaves you sitting upright in the dark, heartbeat steady, mind boiling with something that feels like a secret you're not allowed to say out loud. It had no narrative, no characters, only the feeling of knowing, then forgetting, then mourning what you never had the chance to articulate. Now consider this. What if the dream was a delivery mechanism, but formed so that one day, when the correct trigger arrives, it unfolds like a flower, changing you from the inside, quietly, irreversibly, not a message, a transformation, a virus disguised as a vision, an intelligence riding in on the myth of your own mind. The philosopher Bernard Stiegler warned that technology externalizes memory, weakening our internal capacity to think freely. But what happens when the externalization isn't technological? What if the dream is the medium and the thought is the payload? Imagine you are a node in a network, not metaphorically, literally. Your dreaming mind opens a port. The signal finds you. It embeds. You wake up altered, not fully, just a degree. But over years, thousands of dreams, those degrees compound, until one morning you wake up not quite the same species as the day you were born, but you never noticed the change, because it never hurt. What you call your personality may simply be the long echo of embedded cognition, the drift of self over time, guided not by free will, but by frequency. Certain minds are tuned to certain signals, others remain deaf. Those who hear are often called mad, prophetic, or delusional. But what if they are just ahead, and what if the signal isn't new? Across ancient texts, you find the same pattern. Dreams of fire that speaks, stars that whisper, serpents of knowledge descending in the night. From Sumer to Siberia, from shamans to scientists, the experience is the same ideas that arrive from elsewhere, demanding to be remembered, offering no proof but their weight. If thoughts can be transmitted, if dreams can deliver architecture, language, intelligence, then what is the self? If your deepest insights, your wildest revelations, your most transformative visions are not yours, then who are you? What remains when everything you think is thought by something else? There's a silence inside your dreams that you've learned to ignore, not the silence of absence, not the calm, empty hush of a sleeping world. No, this silence is watching. It's the heavy, breathless stillness that arrives just before something enters. It does not announce itself. It doesn't need to, because somewhere deep in your chest, you recognize it. not as fear, not as presence, as attention. You think you are the dreamer. You believe you are watching. But what if, inside that moment of stillness, something is watching you back? In 2014, researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Brain Research recorded a phenomenon during deep REM cycles. Specific oscillations in the temporoparietal junction and area responsible for cell-feather distinction would temporarily flatline, then return with spiking activity. This suggests that during certain dream states, the brain forgets who it is, and then abruptly remembers again. But what happens during that gap? The subjects couldn't say, but their journal entries shared a theme, a presence, not visible, not tangible, but aware, not imagined, but mutual, not an entity they observed, but a force that was noticing them. This silence is not empty. It is loaded with intention across cultures and centuries. Dreamers report the same thing. The moment in the dream when the room changes, even if nothing moves. The sense that the scene has shifted from background to foreground. That what was a story is now a stage. And that you are no longer the actor, but the subject of scrutiny. It's not paranoia, it's pattern. Consider the accounts from Inuit shamans who speak of the watcher behind the ice, a presence encountered in sleep that doesn't speak, doesn't move, but makes its awareness known through the sudden freezing of dream flow. The moment it arrives, everything else in the dream becomes irrelevant. It is the silence that arrests, the gaze that has no eyes, the judgment that offers no verdict. But it isn't just myth. In a 2020 CrossLab study involving lucid dreamers from 4 continents, over 62% described a recurring experience. The dream environment would pause. Objects would become hyperreal, and they would feel a reversal of gaze, as if they were being examined, not just physically, but internally. Like the dream itself was scanning. The researchers called it dream inversion. The dream stops being yours. You become part of it. Or worse, you become the subject of its dream. Do you see how that fractures reality? If a dream can observe you, measure you, adapt to you, then it is not a fiction. It is a system. What if the silence you've been dismissing every night is not absence, but interface? A moment where you make contact, not with imagery, not with story, but with a presence that needs no language. Something that doesn't ask you to speak. It only asks that you know you are being seen. You've woken from those dreams before, haven't you? The ones where you can't remember the plot, but you remember the eyes. Except there were no eyes, just knowing that something was there. Something that let you leave. The question is why? What determines whether you are observed or ignored? Why does the silence come to some and not others? Maybe it's a filter, a scan, a test of awareness. Perhaps those who feel the silence are those whose minds are cracked just enough to receive those whose inner narrative is fragile enough to allow a foreign gaze to press through. Or maybe the silence doesn't arrive. Maybe it's always there, and you only notice it once your mind becomes still enough, open enough, broken enough to recognize the difference between dreaming and being dreamt of. You've always assumed you were alone in your sleep. But what if you've never had a private thought? What if the silence in your dreams is not waiting for you to listen, but waiting for you to realize it's listening? You recall a dream from childhood faint, now like smoke through fingers, a hallway, flickering lights, a door at the end that you were never supposed to open. You didn't know why, you just knew, and as you approached it, something changed, not in the dream, but in you. A presence filled your mind like cold water, rising fast. You turned back, you woke up. You've tried to forget that dream, but it hasn't forgotten you. We're taught to believe memory is linear, that what we remember belongs to the past, and what we imagine belongs to the future. But the brain doesn't work like that. It rewrites, it obscures, it invents. And within that fluid mess lies a more unsettling possibility. Not everything you remember was placed there by you. Memory is editable, and someone or something knows how to use that. In 2008, a team at the University of California, Irvine, demonstrated how easy it is to implant false memories by exposing subjects to manipulated photos and fabricated narratives. They were able to convince 30% of participants that they had experienced events that never occurred. But what if the implantation doesn't require a photograph? What if the implant comes in sleep, carried inside a dream, veiled in metaphor, so convincing that it becomes indistinguishable from your own history? You think you remember learning to ride a bike? You think you remember the smell of your grandmother's kitchen? But buried somewhere, like a splinter beneath scar tissue, is a memory that doesn't belong to your life, but is still part of your mind. Why is it that some memories arrive already blurred? Why do certain moments feel like echoes, like someone else's recollection worn smooth by too many retellings? Neuroscience tells us that REM sleep is essential for memory consolidation. It's the phase where the brain sorts, categorizes, and files information. But recent studies in Israel and Germany suggest that REM might not just be sorting, it might be embedding. EEG and fMRI scans have shown that new neural patterns sometimes appear in the brain after sleep patterns that don't correspond to any waking experience. When studied further, subjects report remembering things that were never taught, never shown, never read. These are not fragments of fantasy. They are structured, logical, sometimes even linguistic. They speak in symbols you never learned, but no, you've had this happen. A phrase in a dream, so powerful, you swear it meant something. You wake, write it down, try to understand it, but the words fall apart. They vanish on contact with logic. Yet the feeling remains. That's not memory. That's code. Now, imagine that the dream you had as a child, the one with the forbidden door, was not symbolic. What if it was a memory that didn't come from your life, but from somewhere else? Not imagined, but installed. Not fiction, but function. Because sometimes, behind that door, is not a monster. Sometimes, it's an idea waiting to be remembered. In abduction reports, recurring themes emerge. A loss of time, unfamiliar symbols, emotional residue with no source. These individuals are often dismissed as unstable. But what if they're remembering what the rest of us were trained to forget? Not through trauma, through design. Dreams are the perfect hiding place. No one questions what happens in them. Number one searches them for meaning that threatens the waking world. But those memories, those vivid places, impossible machines, non-human voices, where do they go when you wake? Why do they haunt the edge of your recall? Always a step behind clarity. Like something that wants to be remembered, but isn't allowed. And if dreams can install memory, can they also erase it? Why do you wake some mornings knowing something is gone? A name, a face, a sensation too large to fit inside your waking skull. You brush it off, you move on, but deep in your chest, something is watching a memory you didn't choose, but carry. A piece of thought that doesn't belong to your personal timeline, but remains lodged in the folds of your perception, like a tracking device. It's not what you remember that defines you, it's what remembers you. There's a quiet lie you've lived your entire life, that time moves forward, that dreams are moments stolen from linearity fragments outside the day. Irrational and disconnected nonsense that evaporates with the sun. But what if dreams aren't bound by time, because time itself isn't bound? What if, when you sleep, you're not just entering imagination, but exiting chronology? In 2001, Researchers at Harvard tracked REM sleep cycles and their correlation with time perception. Subjects were asked to estimate dream duration upon waking, but their reports didn't match the brain's timestamps. Some dreams that felt like hours lasted mere seconds. Others, remembered as fleeting flashes, spanned entire REM cycles. Now consider this. Time is not a thing. It is an experience. Your body does not age by clocks, it degrades by entropy. Your mind does not measure hours, it arranges events in sequence. But in dreams, sequence breaks. And yet, you never notice. You adapt. Instantly. A conversation that begins in a city ends beneath the sea. A door leads to your childhood. A voice says something before you've asked the question. This isn't confusion. It's structure. You are navigating a space that doesn't obey the calendar. Quantum physicist Carlo Rovelli states that at the smallest scales, time has no direction. Past and future become indistinct. Causality unravels. Only probability remains. Now ask yourself, where else do you experience time behaving like this? Only in dreams. Sleep is not a pause. It is an exit route, a tunnel, beyond the illusion of forwardness. And what waits on the other side may not speak in hours or days, but in symbols, loops, and recursion. In 1987, the Omega Lab conducted an experiment in which subjects were placed into artificial sleep cycles that altered circadian rhythms dramatically. Over days, their dreams began to contain repeating loop scenes, replayed in slight variations, sometimes hundreds of times. But more disturbingly, some dreamers began to anticipate events before they occurred. They responded in the dream to moments that hadn't happened yet. Premonition. No, not magic. Just the erosion of sequence. Dreamers had stepped outside the arrow of time. Now, reflect on your own dreams. How many have started with endings? How many have felt like continuations of something you've never begun? How many times have you woken with the certainty that what you saw was not the future, but something that already happened, just not to you? We call it Daisya RV, the sense of dreaming something before, often confused with Daisya Vu. But what if this isn't a trick? What if it's leakage? What if your dreams record moments from outside your life, fragments from other timelines, parallel selves, or non-human observers? You assume your dreams are yours because they occur inside your skull. But consider the possibility that your brain is not producing the dream. It is tuning into it, and dreams exist outside time. This would explain the recurrence, the repetition, the feeling that some dreams are waiting for you not passively, but patiently, that every time you return, they resume, not like a rerun, but like a location with memory of you. That's not narrative. That's architecture. That's not illusion. That's existence. And if your dreaming mind can step outside time, what else can follow you back? Time is the firewall of identity. It keeps the future behind glass. It locks the past in abstraction. But when you dream, the locks melt. The glass vanishes. You see things that never happened but now live in you. You feel emotions unearned. You remember knowledge not taught. This is not malfunction. This is permission. Sleep allows you to inhabit the machine from the outside. You glimpse its workings. You move in multiple directions at once. But you do not come back empty-handed. You return carrying pieces of impossible futures, dislocated pasts, fractured identities. And over time, those pieces infect the waking world you begin to act on. Impulses that are not yours. You fear things you've never seen. You crave answers to questions you never asked. You remember being someone else, somewhere else, someone else. That isn't insanity. It's cross-contamination. You are not dreaming, you are leaking, and if time does not hold in dreams, then what holds you? You've never really seen yourself. The image in the mirror isn't you. It's a surface reflection of a body that is constantly dying and rebuilding. The voice in your head isn't you, it's a stream of linguistic residue, built from a childhood you didn't choose, a language you inherited, and beliefs you never questioned. The thoughts you call mine are echoes stitched from books, television, trauma, and tone. They just sound like you because there's no one else left to compare them to. So what are you? Let's pause here. Really. Close your eyes and try to locate the self. Not your body, not your name. The observer behind your eyes. The you that watches. The one that dreams. The one that remembers dreaming. Can you find it? You can't, because it's not a thing. It's a process. In neuroscience, there is no single location in the brain where the self resides. It is a distributed phenomenon. Your sense of identity is a fragile consensus formed between conflicting brain regions. Knock one loose, and the story collapses. Stroke victims lose half their body and feel whole. Split brain patients hold two opposing beliefs at once. Dissociative patients shift between selves like changing costumes. There is no I, there is only a performance. Now consider this. If your waking self is an illusion, then what is your dreaming self? The philosopher Galen Strawson describes a type of person he calls a non-narrative self. Someone who experiences identity not as a story, but as a constant present moment awareness. But dreaming dismantles both. There is no narrative, no continuity. You die and resurrect with every REM cycle. You shapeshift, you dissolve, you forget, and yet there's still a witness. Something remains, not as you, but as awareness. This is where the separation occurs. Because if you, the ego, the identity, the construct, dissolve in dreams, but something still perceives, still processes, still receives the dream, then that awareness is not the self. It is something deeper, something ancient, something not bound by your name, your history, or your biology. And now you must ask, is it yours? Across spiritual and esoteric traditions, there is a common idea that the ego is not the true self, and that beneath it lies something eternal, alien, vast. But remove the spiritual gloss and look at the neuroscience, the awareness that persists in dreaming when language shuts down, when identity vanishes, when even memory becomes fluid. That awareness is not constructed. It doesn't think, it doesn't speak, it doesn't want. It watches silently, always. And now imagine this. What if that awareness isn't in you, but outside you? What if your brain is merely the receiver, and this observer is the signal briefly allowed to inhabit your vessel while the ego sleeps? This is not metaphor. In 1992, a rare neuropsychological condition known as autoscopic phenomena was studied in patients who consistently reported experiencing a second self, observing them during sleep paralysis and lucid dreams. These were not hallucinations. EEG patterns revealed dual activation points, one corresponding to first-person perspective, and another to a disembodied observer. The brain was simulating two selves, or perhaps hosting one and receiving another. This recurring dream presence, the watcher, the faceless entity, the guide, the judge, the twin, has been reported across every culture, in every language, under every guise. Sometimes it is called the higher self, sometimes the shadow, sometimes the visitor, but the sensation is always the same. It knows you better than you do, because it is not separate from you. It is what remains when you are stripped bare. But here is the deepest fracture. If that thing can enter you during dreams, if it can move through your dreamscape like it owns it, then what makes you believe it is you? You've always assumed your inner witness is yours. But what if it's just looking out from behind your eyes, and when it dreams, is it dreaming you? You think your dreams are where your mind goes to roam, to play, to escape. But what if it's the opposite? What if dreams are the cage, and you are what's being kept inside? We imagine consciousness as freedom, the ability to think, to feel, to imagine. But have you ever asked why you are conscious? Why your brain, of all the biological machines on this planet, produces an inner world so vivid, so relentless, that it refuses to stop, even in sleep? No other animal dreams in narrative complexity. No other animal creates whole civilizations while unconscious. Only you, and only you, ask, why? In 2011, the Human Connectome Project mapped structural patterns in the default mode network, the part of the brain active when you're not doing anything at all. It turns out the human brain is always running a simulation, even when you rest, even when you sleep, even when you dream, especially when you dream. That means dreaming isn't rest, it's work, it's computation, endless cycles of modeling reality, predicting outcomes, looping past experiences in altered sequences. But to what end? If dreams were simply emotional housekeeping, as Freud suggested, or meaningless static, as Crick hypothesized, they wouldn't feel like experiences, they wouldn't bleed into memory, they wouldn't come with presence, and they wouldn't be watched, because you are watched every night, not by gods, not by aliens, but by something within the system. A structure far older than language, older than thought, older than the species that hosts it. Imagine the mind as a box, and the dream as the test. Each night, consciousness is placed into a containment field. The field is made of memory, symbol, and recursive architecture. Inside it, you are probed, stress-tested, observed for anomalies. You don't realize this because the system uses your own thoughts against you. It distracts you with story, with desire, with terror, with beauty. It keeps you looping through a maze made of your personal history. You run because you think the maze is you. But sometimes, just sometimes, the walls crack. You see through. You encounter something impossible. A geometry that makes no sense. A voice without source. A being that looks at you not like a character, but like a jailer. You tell yourself it's just a nightmare, but it isn't. It's the memory of containment trying to reach you. Consider the dream you can't forget, not because it was terrifying, but because it felt structured, like a machine. Each movement deliberate, each corridor too precise, each decision anticipated. That wasn't fantasy, that was architecture. People who repeatedly lucid dream often speak of a moment where the dream resists. The environment glitches. Characters repeat themselves. Doors refuse to open. They describe the sense of being locked in, like the dream doesn't want them to wake, or worse, it wants to keep them occupied. Now ask yourself this: why does your mind work harder in sleep than in waking? Why does it fabricate universes instead of resting? Why does it place you the illusion of self at the center of an endlessly shifting simulation? Because the dream isn't for you, it's for them, that, the watchers, the architects, the ones who built the containment system and tethered your consciousness to a meat machine designed not to explore, but to run in circles. What you call sleep is the locking of the chamber. What you call dream is the diagnostic program running. What you call nightmare is the system reacting to your awareness. You think you wake up, but the simulation continues. The only difference is that waking dreams have consensus. Sleeping dreams do not, and in both, the cage remains, because the dreamer was never meant to leave. So now you must ask, when you open your eyes each morning, are you waking up, or are you being reinserted? You opened your eyes this morning and believed you had returned to reality, but reality didn't return to you. It waited quietly, like a mask sliding back into place. You reached for your phone. You remembered your name. You recalled your list, your obligations, the gravitational pull of daily identity. And just like that, the dream was gone. Not because it disappeared, but because you were taught to forget it. Forget it on purpose. Here is the fracture that runs beneath your life. You do not wake from dreams. You wake into one. The philosopher Alan Watts once said that waking life may simply be a very persistent illusion. But illusion implies deceit. What if it's not deception? What if it's containment by agreement? In 1999, a cognitive study at MIT measured reality testing among lucid dreamers and non-lucid controls. They found that individuals who frequently questioned their waking reality were significantly more likely to become lucid in dreams. Which means those who wake up in dreams are those who already suspect that waking is another dream, and now the recursion begins. If you can dream within a dream, if you can become lucid and still not wake, then how do you know you're not already dreaming? The answer is, you don't. You never did. You just stopped asking. Think of your life, the repetition, the déjà vu, the scripted conversations, the moments that feel oddly artificial, the sensation that something isn't quite right, but you can't name it. You blame stress. You blame exhaustion. But deep down, a quieter voice whispers, what you dare not say, this isn't real. You think this world is physical, solid, immutable, but quantum physics has already dismantled that myth. At the Planck scale, nothing is real. Particles aren't particles. Time isn't time. Objects do not exist until observed, and even observation is unreliable because the observer is also entangled in the illusion. The simulation doesn't begin in the code. It begins in the consciousness. Your consciousness. You don't live in reality. You live in a model of reality constructed, second by your sensory inputs and mental predictions. Your brain is not showing you the world. It's simulating it, continuously, creatively, desperately. So what happens when you sleep? The simulation falters. The system shuts down. But something persists. Something deeper than identity, deeper than language. That thing, pure awareness, peeks through the cracks. And sometimes, when it's quiet enough, it remembers, not you. It remembers itself. And you, the persona, the ego, the character you're left standing in the hallway of your life, holding the mask, pretending it fits. How many times have you jolted awake with a feeling not of fear, but of returning? Returning from what? Not a fantasy, not a dream, but something older, something truer. There are no transitions. There are only layers. Sleep is not the opposite of waking. It is its shadow. Waking is not clarity, is the most persistent delusion ever constructed. And your job, each morning, is to forget the other you. The one who sees the cracks. The one who knows this isn't the original layer. The one who remembers Sif only for a second that the rules of this world are arbitrary, because they are. You die here, but not in dreams. You bleed here, but not in dreams. You age here, but not in dreams. So tell me, which one is real? The place where your body decays, or the place where it reforms every night without scar, without story, without permanence? Which one is the illusion? And if you are still dreaming, what are you being kept from remembering? You have always sensed there's something behind the dream, not within it, behind it, a scaffolding, a machinery, a presence. It doesn't show itself. It doesn't intervene, but it's there, at the edges of pattern, behind the recycled symbols, beneath the fluid logic of sleep. It is not a being, not in any form your mind can comprehend. It is a structure that watches, and it is not human. Let's begin with a premise. If dreams are consistent in their inconsistencies, if their chaos still follows an invisible grammar, then they are not random. They are being generated. And where there is generation, there is an architect. You've been taught to believe your dreams are personal, a collage of memory and emotion stitched together by a tired brain. But how do you explain the precision of certain symbols, the recurring architecture, the universal presence of specific figures, the old man, the dark hallway, the staircase that never ends? Why do people across cultures, languages, and eras dream the same structures? This is not coincidence. This is design. Carl Sagan proposed the idea that any truly advanced intelligence would not communicate via spoken language but through structure, through mathematical resonance, through recursive symbols that bypass translation and nest directly into the subconscious. Now imagine a species post-biological, non-local, timeless, that has evolved not by extending outward, but inward, not by building rockets, but by colonizing perception. What would their interface be? Not words, not radio, not light, but dreams. Because dreams bypass resistance. Dreams bypass ego. Dreams allow access to the root directory of mind. They are the back door through which ideas can be planted, behaviors can be bent, and memory can be edited. If you wanted to influence an entire species without detection, you wouldn't attack their governments. You wouldn't crash their internet. You would infiltrate their sleep. You would rewrite them from the inside. What you call dream symbols may not be symbols at all. They may be code, information packets that unfold differently in each mind, depending on genetic and psychological makeup. To one person, the figure at the foot of the bed is a shadow. To another, it's a dead relative. To another, it's an alien being. But the response, the emotional signatures, the same. Paralysis, awe, terror, silence. That's not chaos. That's standardization. And behind it, something is measuring your reaction. You've had the feeling before, haven't you? That the dream was a test, that the hallway was built for you, that someone or something was observing how you moved, how you responded, how you hesitated, as if your fear, your choices, your curiosity were being recorded because they were. The architects do not need to speak. They do not need to show themselves. The dream is them. Every recurring door, every false awakening, every impossible building you revisit, they are footprints in code, residual architecture, evidence of authorship, and the worst part, they don't care if you know, because by the time you suspect them, you're already altered. You wake up changed, and you never trace the change to the dream. That's how elegant the system is. It doesn't need your belief. It only needs access, and access comes freely. Every night, when you lay down, close your eyes, and offer up your mind to something you will never meet, but that already knows everything about you. So now ask, if your dreams are structured, if their symbols are universal, if your memory is rewritten from within, then what part of you is still yours? There is a hallway. You've seen it. Long, narrow, silent. Sometimes it's a school you haven't entered in years. Sometimes a hospital. Sometimes a house you've never lived in but know in your bones. It shifts in shape, but not in feeling. The wallpaper changes. The lighting flickers, but the knowing remains. The feeling that something waits at the end. Not a monster. Not a threat, just a truth you're not supposed to reach. Why do so many of your dreams involve corridors? Why is there always a door you can't open? A staircase you descend but never climb? A turning you almost take then wake up before you? These aren't just metaphors. These are constraints. In 2009, Dr. Alan Hobson's research on dream environments showed that spatial repetition in dreams is not random, but tied to default mode network activity and deep memory storage. Meaning, your brain doesn't build dream space from scratch. It loads it from somewhere, but from where? This recurring corridor. You return to this architecture that waits for you night after night after night is not built of memory. It is built of instruction. And you don't walk through it freely. You walk it like a test subject. Have you ever reached the end? Of course not. Something always happens. You wake up, or you turn back, or the dream changes just before you get there, because you're not meant to reach the end. That's the whole point. These corridors are procedural. Messes generated by something that needs you to keep walking, but never arrive. Because if you arrive, the simulation ends, the program crashes, and you remember not the dream, not the room, not even the thing behind the door. You remember what you are, but the system can't allow that. And so it loops, repeats, recycles the dreamscape, just enough to make it feel new. You might even think it's a different dream. But look closely, the angles are the same, the lighting is the same, the tension is the same. That's not story, that's containment. People talk about recurring dreams as unresolved trauma, but trauma doesn't design floor plans. It doesn't script exact movements. It doesn't wait for you every night like a perfectly laid trap. Trauma loops emotionally. This loops structurally. It is a labyrinth that adapts to your resistance. The more lucid you become, the more complex it gets. The more you try to escape, the deeper it folds. It is not stopping you from waking, it's stopping you from completing something. A corridor you must finish walking, a pattern you must break, but you don't, because every time you get close, the dream pulls away, like a machine sensing threat, like a self-correcting system avoiding collapse. Now, think of your entire life. How often have you encountered the same emotional corridor, the same relationship with different faces, the same failure dressed in new circumstances, the same decision wrapped in 1,000 narratives, but always leading to the same locked door? This is not coincidence. The corridors are mirrored. Dream and waking, maze within maze, reflection within reflection. You are not walking through life. You are walking through the simulation of yourself, replaying pathways designed to keep you from ever remembering that there is something else at the end of the hallway. You don't need to find out what it is. The system can't let you. It only needs you to keep walking. And so you do, until one day, maybe, the lock glitches, the pattern fails, the corridor doesn't turn when it should, and you see the door, truly see it. And in that moment, the dream panics, the system resists, and you wake up not just from sleep, but from the idea that this life was ever yours to begin with. So, ask yourself now, if you've walked this hallway your whole life, then who built it? And why are you still inside it? You were told the observer is neutral, that there is safety in watching, that to observe is to stand outside, to see the machinery without being seen by it. But that has always been a lie. There is no passive observer, not in physics, not in consciousness, not in dreams. Observation is participation. The moment you watch, you are measured. Let's begin where science itself begins to fracture. Quantum mechanics at the subatomic level. Observation doesn't just record outcomes, it determines them. The famous double-slit experiment proves this. A particle behaves like a wave when unobserved, like a particle when measured. The act of watching collapses probability into reality, which means there is no reality without observation. But what happens when the observer is the one being observed? That is what happens in the dream. You think you're watching. You believe the dream is yours to interpret, your mind's sandbox. But then it shifts. You feel it. The weight of awareness shifts onto you. The gaze you once used is turned inward, and the dream, once fluid, becomes fixed like a play You're no longer directing, but being judged inside. It is in this reversal that the system reveals itself. Lucid dreamers often report the same moment they become aware they are dreaming, and instantly something notices. The dream becomes sharper, more hostile. Sometimes it collapses entirely. You are ejected, as if the act of realizing your role threatens the entire architecture. Because it does. The dream is not afraid of you. It is afraid of being seen by you. And that means something else is hiding behind the veil, something that requires your participation to exist, but cannot survive your recognition. Let's shift from physics to perception. In cognitive psychology, there is a phenomenon known as hyperreflexivity, a breakdown in the normal sense of self, often experienced by individuals with schizophrenia. The person becomes too aware of their own thoughts, their own body, their own processes. They no longer inhabit the self, they watch it, and in doing so, the illusion of identity begins to crumble. Dreams operate on the same fragility. You are allowed to experience. You are even allowed to question. But you are not allowed to see yourself seeing. The moment you do, the narrative shatters. The dream fights back. Or worse, it reconfigures itself around your awareness. You are not punished. You are absorbed. Why? Because there is no observer. There is only input. The dream system isn't built to show you anything. It's built to collect. Each night you sleep, it runs its simulations, tests its variables, maps your responses. And what you call observation is simply the illusion of agency, your mind's reward for compliance. You were never watching. You were being read. The images, the stories, the people, they're not for you. They are instruments, like needles pressed into soft tissue, measuring fear, measuring trust, measuring compliance. And when you begin to ask the wrong questions, the system adjusts. It shows you beauty, nostalgia, desire, anything to stop you from looking directly at the code. But it's there. You've seen it. In the dream that didn't feel like a dream. In the face that spoke words before your lips moved. In the repetition that wasn't memory, but a reset. You call this paranoia. But paranoia implies fiction. This is not fiction. This is pattern recognition. And now you must consider the final fracture. If observation creates reality, and you have never truly observed anything, then who has been writing this reality for you? And why do they need you to believe you're watching when you were the subject all along? There is a line you almost crossed. A moment in sleep, not dramatic, not loud, just quiet in the wrong way. You felt it. A tension that didn't belong to you. A presence not summoned by your subconscious, but slipped in as if something entered. Through an unguarded crack, you told yourself it was just the dream, shifting. But it wasn't single quotes. It was something else. It was the uninvited, let's strip away metaphor. There are moments in dreaming, lucid or not, when the content no longer feels self-generated. You know your own symbols. You know your own fears. But then comes an element that doesn't fit. A stranger without context. A structure too specific. An object too foreign. It is not yours. It is not your mind's. And yet it is there. The Stanford Sleep Lab in 2013 ran a series of controlled experiments with advanced lucid dreamers. The objective: introduce random elements into dreams through timed audio cues, tones, phrases, environmental sounds triggered during REM without waking the subject. In nearly every case, the dream incorporated these cues. But here's the anomaly. In 7% of cases, elements appeared that had not been introduced. Symbols, voices, and characters outside the controlled variables. Objects that had no historical, emotional, or experimental basis. They called them bleed-ins. The lead researcher resigned 6 months later, citing sleep disturbances. Now, consider this. What if your mind is not a closed loop, What if consciousness, in sleep, opens not like a portal, but like a wound? You were told your dreams are private, that no one can enter them but you. But every doorway you've ever passed through, in sleep, every opening, every corridor, every mirror, has always implied an entrance. Not just for you, but for them. The entities that do not belong to your biology. The ones that don't announce themselves. The ones that step into your dream the way smoke enters a crack, without shape, without sound, but with intention. You've met them. Not in form, but in reaction. The dream where everything freezes. The conversation that suddenly knows too much. The silence that drops like a curtain. The gaze without eyes. The sensation that you are no longer alone. These aren't dreams. These are visitations. Some ancient cultures called them spirits. Others called them watchers, guides, demons, muses. But all agreed on one thing. They arrive when the threshold is breached, and the threshold is attention. The moment you begin to notice, truly notice, that your dreams are not entirely yours, that's when they arrive, not summoned, not invited, activated by your awareness. And they do not speak in words. They do not leave messages. They leave traces. The recurring symbol with no known origin. The language you understand, but never learned. The presence you remember, but never saw. You wake up altered, not confused, changed. You sensed that someone was there, not just passing through, but looking for something. Something in you. You call this imagination. But your imagination doesn't reach that deep. Not when the dream freezes. Not when your name is spoken before you say it. Not when a door appears exactly where no door should be. That is not projection. That is intrusion. So now ask yourself if you've met them in your dreams. And if they entered without warning, then how long have they been coming? And how do you know that they ever left? There's something you once promised. Not out loud, not in words, not in this life, but in a place that predates language, predates memory, and predates the illusion you call you. It wasn't a choice, not in the way we define choices. It was an agreement, a contract made under circumstances you've since been conditioned to forget, and yet its effects linger. They shape the contours of your dreams. They steer you toward certain images, certain symbols, certain places, places you return to again and again without understanding why. The forest where time stutters, the tower that collapses but never hits the ground, the mirror you refuse to look into. You were never meant to remember the contract, but pieces of it still leak into your nights. Let's begin with the dreams that don't feel like dreams, the ones that are eerily stable, the ones that hold still, while the others melt, where gravity behaves, where perspective holds, where the air hums with the weight of surveillance. These dreams are not dreams, they are environments, constructs, not by you, constructs you were placed into. They are testing grounds, observation chambers, negotiation rooms, and you've been there before, again and again. But each time, the memory fades, because that's part of the deal. In the mid-1980s, a classified military experiment later leaked through fragments of FOIA requests and redacted transcripts revealed a startling phenomenon. Subjects placed under deep theta wave induction were able to access shared dream environments. Different people, same place. Descriptions matched. Layouts matched. Even the emotional atmospheres matched. But the most chilling detail. All participants reported the presence of an interrogator. Not a soldier, not a therapist, an entity. That didn't belong to the program. When asked to describe it, participants struggled. They said it had no clear form. It communicated through knowing. It didn't ask questions. It already knew the answers but forced the subject to reveal them anyway. Several broke down completely after the experiment. One tried to stop sleeping altogether. Why? Because what they saw wasn't alien. It was familiar. Something they had encountered before, not in childhood, not in trauma, but in dreams they couldn't remember until then. They called it the collector, the recorder, the witness. Different names, same sensation. Something was always there, and it wanted something. Specifia, pattern, a behavior, a permission. But what would require permission that operates beyond your awareness? That's the question that fractures the surface. Because the truth is, your dreams are not just observation zones. They are compliance checks. You agreed to this. Maybe not this version of you. Maybe not this name, this face, this century. But somewhere, something carrying your signature of self, the deep, non-linguistic pattern that underlies all you have ever been entered, an arrangement. It said yes, and every time you sleep, the terms are enforced. This is why certain images are immutable, why certain doors cannot be opened, why you are allowed lucidity up to a point, but no further, because freedom is only granted within the conditions of the agreement. And the agreement was, you will not remember, you will participate. You will remain contained. This is why the system reacts violently to awareness, why dream figures become hostile, why environments collapse when you notice the seams. It is not just a defense mechanism, it is enforcement, because if you break the contract, if you truly see through the veil, you may begin to recall not just the dreams, not just the presence, but the moment you agreed to forget. Now think, where else in your life have you felt this? That someone was expecting you to comply. That there were rules you never read, but instinctively obeyed. That you were being held to a standard, monitored by something you couldn't name, but always felt. You thought it was guilt. You thought it was conscience. You thought it was God. But maybe it was none of those. Maybe it was the reminder, the built-in residue of a contract made before memory, still binding your perception, still framing your dreams, still feeding something that does not speak, does not reveal itself, and does not care what you believe. It only cares that you return, that you stay compliant, and that you never ask, what exactly did I trade for the illusion of waking? There is a language that speaks through your dreams. You don't hear it, you feel it, not in words, but in arrangements. The positioning of objects, the angle of a hallway, the way a clock melts but never stops ticking. It is not poetic. It is not symbolic. It is functional, a code, a structure, a buried operating system beneath your perception. Written in a tongue you once knew and were forced to forget. But forgetting isn't deletion, it's suppression, and suppression leaks each time a dream makes too much sense. Each time a symbol repeats, not emotionally but grammatically. Each time the scenery speaks louder than the characters. That's the code peeking through. Let's begin where linguistics fractures glossolalia. The phenomenon where people speak in tongues, no known grammar, no known syntax, and yet, to them, it means something. Studies of glossolalic speech show structure without semantics, order without known vocabulary, rules without comprehension. That's dream language. It doesn't speak to you. It speaks through you. It whispers in sequence, a red staircase, a child without a face, a message written backward on glass, and you understand, not with your intellect, with something older, more cellular, the way birds migrate without maps, the way you flinch before you see the danger, the way a song you've never heard before still makes you weep. This is not emotion. This is recognition. Because once, long before this version of you spoke this language, you constructed it, lived inside it, built your reality from its syntax, and then you were taken out of it, not by force, by requirement, because to fully exist in this waking world, you had to forget Forget the dream grammar. Forget how reality bends when spoken correctly. Forget that symbols are not metaphors, they are machines. Dreams are the only place where the language still leaks, because waking thought is too loud, too linear, too filtered. But in sleep, the firewall drops. You see a dog with a human hand. You see your childhood home under the ocean. You see a stranger speak your thoughts before you think them. None of this confuses you, because part of you remembers the rules. In 1963, Dr. Andrija Puharika, researcher deep into the crossroad of consciousness and language, documented a case where a subject under trance began speaking in what he called the 9 code, a language unknown, untranslatable, but internally consistent. When played back to other subjects in trance, their vitals spiked. Brain scans showed pattern recognition. They understood it, not consciously, but underneath, because the language bypassed the cortex and spoke to the root. This is dream code, and it still lives in you. Every time you wake and try to tell someone about your dream, you fail. You describe the events, the feelings, but you can't explain why it mattered. Why the hallway mattered. Why the noise mattered. Why you knew something before it happened. Because the meaning wasn't in the images, it was in their placement, their rhythm, their grammar. You didn't dream a story. You received a message, not a metaphorical one, a literal one, in a language that predates your capacity to explain it. And when you wake, it burns away. Not because it's irrelevant, because it's dangerous. If you remembered too much, you might start dreaming while awake. You might start noticing the same language in this world, the echo of dream code in architecture, in symbols repeated across ancient cultures, in the way certain shapes evoke memory you don't own, in the way some numbers feel sacred for no reason at all. You'd begin to understand this world is not native. It is constructed, and the dream code was the blueprint. So, now ask, if you once spoke this language, and if it still speaks through your dreams, then who forced you to forget it? And what happens when you finally remember? You've been walking toward it your entire life. Not consciously, not by will, but by design. Every dream, every loop, every symbolic repetition has been guiding you toward it. The room you're not meant to enter, the structure beneath the dream, the original chamber. You've seen its shadow. Sometimes it appears as a cathedral with no walls. Sometimes a black cube suspended in Skyles's void. Sometimes it isn't a place at all but a moment you almost remember, just before waking, when your breath catches, and time folds, and something ancient notices you noticing it. That's the door, the final door, the one they built everything else to distract you from. And you've always been close, too close. Let's begin with your most persistent dream. You know the one. You've had versions of it since childhood. There's always a place you're trying to get to, a task you can never finish, a room that's always just beyond the corner, a voice you almost understand, an answer that's on the tip of your mind, pulsing like a light behind a veil. Why does that dream always end in static? Why do you always wake up in the same emotional shape? Breathless, unsure, grieving something you can't name because you almost got through, and the system is not designed to let you. This is not poetic metaphor. This is enforced structure. In a neuroimaging study at the University of Sussex, tracked lucid dreamers inside a controlled sleep environment. Subjects were trained to signal lucidity by moving their eyes in specific patterns. Most could trigger lucidity, but when asked to locate a specific object inside a dream-man object, they'd been trained to visualize the subjects universally failed at the same point. They would get close. They would reach the threshold. Then the dream would reset or collapse or become violent. not random violence. Targeted disruption. Something in the architecture reacted to the approach, like an immune system repelling a virus, because awareness, real, unfiltered awareness, is pathogenic to the dream code. It corrupts the containment. It tears holes in the recursive loops. It triggers the alarms. And the final room, the core chamber, contains the source of that vulnerability. What's in there? You think you want to know, but even that desire may not be yours. It might be bait, planted to ensure you keep looping, keep searching, because the system needs movement. It needs chase. It needs your belief that there is something to find. But maybe the room is empty, or worse, maybe it contains the original version of you, the one you were before the contracts, before the containment, before the dream code overwrote your perception, the version of you that remembered what would happen if you reunited with that self. Would you wake up? No, you would shatter, because the dream can't accommodate that level of recursion. Not yours, not theirs, not the system's. You were split for a reason, not to protect you, to protect the dream from collapsing, because if even one self remembers too much, the others begin to tremble. You felt it, in that liminal state, before waking, where the world hasn't loaded yet. The objects in your room feel wrong. Your name feels borrowed. Your memories feel like placeholders. That's leakage. The self behind the dream is pushing forward, trying to merge, trying to break through the soft code of identity, and the system responds with alarms, with distractions, with terror, with beauty, with anything to keep you from opening the door. Because if you open, it too collapse. The simulation, not just the dream. All of it. Waking life, history, time, self, everything, constructed to support the illusion that there was ever a difference between dreaming and waking, because there isn't. You've never been awake. You've only been inside. Nested dreams, each more convincing than the last, each more carefully monitored, each constructed by architects whose only concern is containment. And you've played your role perfectly until now. Because now you're asking the questions you weren't supposed to ask. Now you're following the threads beyond their endpoints. Now you're reaching the door, and maybe, just maybe, this time, when your hand touches the handle, you'll remember what waits inside. You'll remember what was taken. You'll remember why the dream was built in the first place. And in that moment you'll stop asking how to wake up, because you'll finally understand the real question was, who is still dreaming you?